as I said, this webinar is for how to foster healthy marriages in our world. And so today you'll be getting practical tips that you, the Catholic leaders in your parishes and various communities, can use when ministering to couples, whether they already be married or if they're engaged couples who are preparing to be married, and teach them how to maintain a healthy marriage and learn things like conflict resolution and communication, counseling, spiritual direction, and much more. So with that, I want to introduce our distinguished panel. I'm feeling a little outnumbered here with 4 guys, as the only girl here, but happy to be here. So I would like to start with Father Charles Sikorsky. He is the president of the Institute for the Psychological Sciences and has been so since July 2007. He joined IPS after finishing his licentiate in canon law at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. He also has degrees in philosophy and theology from the Regina Apostolorum Pontifical University. And Father Charles was ordained to the priesthood in Rome on December 24th, 2002 by the now Cardinal Leonardo Sandri. Father Sikorsky, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Next, Father Sean Kilcawley. He's the director of the Office for Family Life in the Diocese of Lincoln, Nebraska. Before entering seminary, he was in the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He served 3 years as an infantry officer there. He was ordained in 2005 and earned a license in sacred theology in 2012. Father Kilcawley currently serves also as a senior advisor for Integrity Restored, which is an organization dedicated to restoring the integrity of individuals and families that have been wounded by pornography and the sexualized culture. Father Kilcawley, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be here tonight.
All right, next, Dr. Gregory Bottaro. He is the director of the Catholic Psych Institute and a clinical psychologist practicing in New York, Connecticut, and also internationally through Skype therapy. He received his doctorate from the Institute for the Psychological Sciences, and he formed the Catholic Psych Institute in 2012 to connect Catholics around the world with therapists trained to integrate the faith with the practice. Dr. Bottaro, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
And finally, Steve Bowman is the founder of Paradisus Day. He has a BS in chemical engineering from the University of Oklahoma, as well as an MBA from Notre Dame. His varied background enables him to integrate the teachings of our faith with the findings of modern science and present it in an accessible manner. In 2001, responding to a personal call, he founded Paradisus Day, which is a lay Catholic ministry dedicated to finding God within the context of marriage and family life. Steve, it's great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Hannah.
Now, we'll have an opportunity, gentlemen, for you all to kind of promote your various ministries throughout. But I wanted to start, Father Sikorsky, with just our first discussion topic, which is the fact that healthy marriages are really becoming rarer and rarer these days. And I'm wondering, what are some of the more common issues that you encounter when working with couples who are married or preparing for marriage?
Sure. Well, I think it all starts from the cultural context in which we're living. There was a book a few years ago by a sociologist at Johns Hopkins talking about why in the United States we have a very high marriage rate. At the same time, we have a very high divorce rate. And it seems on one hand that we see great value in marriage, but at the same time, they're not necessarily working well, right? And his conclusion was that, and this was a non-Catholic, this was a Jewish scholar. He said that problem is people are getting married for the wrong reasons. That there's this idea that is kind of fed from our narcissistic culture that marriage is about personal fulfillment. It's about, a sense of achievement that, okay, I've achieved this status in my life, I'm married to someone, and I'm really kind of looking at it as a way to satisfy my personal needs and my own self-esteem, and just making it more and more about personal fulfillment and less about service to your spouse, to your wife, to your family. And this goes in direct contradiction. The Catechism number 1534, and it talks about two sacraments that are ordered toward the salvation of others. One of those is holy orders, and the other is marriage. That the ultimate end of marriage is not self-fulfillment, but it's helping other people get to heaven, to put it quickly. And that by doing that, and by living a life of service, it helps us it leads us to our own salvation and to our own true happiness. And so when you contrast those two views, it's a total contradiction. The world has it backwards. And so many people who are approaching marriage today are greatly influenced, and you might say infected, by this worldly attitude that, it's more about what I can get out of it rather than what I can give. And so that would be the first part. And the second thing that I think is very important to keep in mind is remember that this is a sacrament. This is that Christ is a partner in this. That it's a three-way partnership, and it takes three to get married. And unfortunately, many people through, I think, marriage preparation and different things aren't quite getting that or don't want that. And they tend to actually then have to live out marriage thinking that it's they're relying on their own strength. I think Scott Hahn once said, marriage is a sacrament because it's humanly impossible. And I think it's so important that we remember that. And I think, the big issues we just had with the Supreme Court last week, hopefully will cause us to reflect more and more about what a gift it is that we have through the sacrament to do this. It's not just about the man and the woman. It's the man and the woman united in God's love. Christ says, everything you love about your spouse, I love just as much. I love more. I want you to be happy. I want him or her to be happy, and I want to help you do that. So couples are not alone, and I think that's the general atmosphere there is something that is a huge challenge today. And marriage, and I know we have other panelists who can give other insights from their perspective. I think from the spiritual perspective, we can't forget that. It's not only about an emotional bond, it's not just about a physical bond, but there's also a spiritual bond, and we have God there with us. And so helping people to realize that, to take advantage of what the sacrament offers is very important. It's kind of like, it took me a long time to put apps on my phone because I didn't was just too much aggravation. And once I put a couple apps on my phone, I was like, hey, these are pretty cool. Now I got 40 or 50 of them on there. Sometimes the sacraments are that way. We kind of put it in a little box and we don't understand the great potential that the Lord gives us through that. And I think marriage can be that. Some people may struggle. Well, we got married, we got confirmed, or whatever the sacrament. It didn't do a whole lot for me. I think we have to be open to it and allow God to work more in it. And I think obviously there are many other important issues that need to be addressed, but I think we really can't lose focus that this is a sacrament. It's a partnership with Jesus Christ.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Pataro, I'm curious to get your perspective on this, given that you are a counselor yourself. What kind of issues do you encounter when you're counseling couples?
Well, I think I'll start off from sort of a broad perspective and then come down to some more specific examples. But I think, ultimately there is a cultural problem with understanding the gospel call amongst Catholics and in our world, in our church. And so there's really this difference between, on one hand, the call of Christ to take up a cross and follow me. When he says those who seek to save their life will lose it, and those who give it up will find it. I mean, that's basically the gospel message: to die to self, to give oneself over, to love, to make a gift of oneself. And then on the other hand, you have the motto of the Satanic Church, and which is basically the motto of our culture at this point, which is do what feels good. And so you have these two themes, two mottos that have been battling each other. And in the church, the voice of sacrifice, of laying down one's life, of seeking to give oneself up in order to find oneself, that's being lost in our culture of do what feels good. And so that has made its way into marriage now. And so very specifically and very concretely and in very simple ways, marriage becomes a way of sort of living together as a benefit to self, whether it's financial gain, to be able to experience pleasure, to have the lifestyle that one envisions and fantasizes about, or even in spiritual circles, to say, well, this is what's holy, this is what I need to do, and so I'm going to do this so that I look holy. There are so many ways that a sort of selfishness has been absorbed by people today, and that ultimately becomes the root of a lot of marital discord. And so, like Father Charles was saying, this is really kind of a humanly impossible task, to give oneself over entirely to another person and to live with somebody, practically speaking, to the extent that a married couple has to live together. And so without having the proper training and formation of what it means to, on a large scale, an overarching scale, to give oneself over to another, it falls apart. There's no way to seek self and to seek the self-validation, self-fulfillment, and live in a healthy and happy marriage.
Yeah, for sure. Steve, I'm wanting to get your perspective on this now. So what kind of things do you encounter with Paradisus Day, the struggles that married couples have?
Sure. And if I could, I'd like to put some context with this for a moment. That is, if you go back and you look for marriages that began in the 1930s, less than 20% ended in divorce. By the time you got to the 1960s, marriages that were begun in the 1960s, more than 40% ended in divorce. So we see that there was this huge cultural shift that happened between that, and certainly the philosophies that we've just been hearing, the mindsets were critical, but what also that did was it drove behavior. So if you go through and you look at the research that says what are the things that lead to divorce, the number one thing that leads to divorce is infidelity to the spousal union. And that more than quadruples the likelihood that someone will end up getting divorced. And the numbers are really no different if that's virtual infidelity, meaning pornography, or if that's actual infidelity. And furthermore, from a Catholic perspective, what we know is we're supposed to be faithful to our future spouse even before marriage by saving ourselves for marriage. And so you find out that cohabitation increases the probability of divorce by about 65%. So the first thing we see is there's been this huge change, when it comes to sexuality. And that's directly striking at the one-flesh union of man and woman that, in my case, Shelley and I are called to be exclusive, mutually exclusive to each other. The next thing we have are money problems. If you look at it, people who have issues with debt more than doubles the likelihood that they'll be divorced. And in fact, for newlywed couples, the number one issue is pre-existing debt. Even more than sexual issues, the number one issue for newlywed couples is pre-existing debt. And it's all back to the lifestyle that we've been hearing about. It's about me, it's about pleasures and those things. I charge up my credit cards, and suddenly now my spouse has to pay for my fun when I went down to whatever I ended up doing, but she had none of the fun. And then you look at substance abuse issues, once again, they're going to double or even triple the likelihood of divorce, and whether that's drugs or alcohol. So all of a sudden, we've had this change, and we know the explosion of drugs we've had in our culture. So if you look at the culture we live in today versus the culture that happened a generation ago, we've had a massive change in mindset that's led to a change in behavior. And then, as we heard earlier, of course, at the same time that change has happened, what had happened is people will quit going to church. And in fact, if you look at all of the studies, the number one thing that people can do to lower the probability of divorce is to go to church on a weekly basis. And then you look at it, it's interesting because researchers said, well, what is it that's so special about going to church on a weekly basis? And one of the things, and certainly many things, but one of the things is all of those things we just mentioned, it changes those behaviors. So if I go to church on a weekly basis, I'm less likely to cheat on my spouse. I'm less likely to get into money problems. I'm less likely to have substance abuse problems. And so as we've been hearing, kind of the remedy for this selfishness is I go to church. And there I encounter the God who gave everything for us, and then especially as we talk about the Catholics, through the Eucharist, I get to enter into his sacrifice, and I learn to become sacrificial with him. So that is massive change in the culture in which we live, that all the things that strike at the heart of a marriage have become the norm, so that today, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 of all youth will cohabitate before they get married, even though that's going to set them up for failure in the future. Debts exploded, substance abuse, so all these things that are striking the heart of marriage has exploded in the culture in which we live, and the very remedy that's going to help us with it, people have abandoned by and large. In fact, if you look at couples today who practice what we would say faithfulness to the one flesh union, both before and after marriage, and then if you look at people who have weekly church attendance and they go to, they have a daily prayer life, it reduces the probability of divorce to less than 5%. So we have this huge change in behaviors, and those people are having massive amounts of divorce. Those people have done what we would consider just standard, spiritual practices. The divorce rate for those people has not changed through this whole period.
An interesting point. Now, Father Kilcawley, I want to move on to you because I know that you have, well, not exactly a unique perspective with the prevalence of pornography in our culture, but a unique perspective as a priest who works with pornography addiction. That's a huge problem with marital fidelity.
Yeah, I had no idea how big a problem it was until I started doing this ministry a couple of years ago. And so, but I'd have to say that what I see when I work with couples where pornography is entered into their marriage, at the core, I see the same issues in a lot of couples who are struggling in their marriages. Because the biggest problem that I would see is that we don't really know how to be loved. And I say that because in Gaudium et Spes 22, it says, man is the only creature that God created for his own sake, and he comes to know himself by making the sincere gift of himself. And when John Paul II wrote the Theology of the Body audiences, his whole anthropology that he sets up in the beginning starts with this idea of God creating man in original solitude, which means that we were first created for relationship with God. It's there that we find our identity. It's there that we find our security. And when I know that I'm secure as a son or a daughter of God, then I can have self-possession, give myself in self-sacrifice to another. And so marriage is built on that foundation of a relationship with Christ first. And many of the couples that are getting married in the church today aren't really encountering our Lord. Lots of them were catechized but not evangelized. They don't really know the love of our Lord. They don't know our Lord's mercy in their life. And when pornography particularly enters into a marriage, for the addict, most often, they have never experienced God's mercy in their life. They have always used pornography as a way of dealing with their loneliness, their boredom, their anger, their stress. When they're tired, they turn to pornography, and pornography became their refuge. So I'll often have people read Psalm 71 and say, I want you to substitute pornography for Lord everywhere it appears in the psalm. So they have to say out loud, in you, O pornography, I take refuge. Because that's the reality of their life. And so then that leads to all kinds of insecurity about their ability to love their wife, and it causes them to withdraw, and it causes shame. And then when a spouse discovers that, they feel betrayal, and they experience that dynamic of being unlovable. And in the healing process, both of them have to be healed in their identity as a son and a daughter first, in order to then heal their marriage. And particularly today, because so many young people are being exposed to pornography at a young age, it's causing this distortion about love and marriage right out of the chute. Most kids today are getting exposed when they're about 12 years old. Their ideas about love, sexuality, marriage, all get distorted from the get-go. And if they don't get help before the engagement period, they most likely are going to just carry that into their marriage. And for most of them, they have this idea of, well, when I get married, I'll stop looking at pornography, but that usually doesn't happen. They might last a little while and then revert back when some other stressor enters into their life. And so in the marriage prep process, I think we need to be more aggressive about getting people the healing that they need from any kind of sexual sin they've had in their past. And I see just as much previous sexual abuse in women as I do pornography addiction in men. And we need to pay attention to all of that. And also equip families to actually be families and to be secure bases of love in the lives of their children. Because most of the couples I see that struggle, they struggle with trusting another person. Like, they don't believe this other person can possibly love me. They don't trust them. And they probably grew up in an environment where they didn't have parents that were secure in their life, that were always there. I think one of the biggest shifts since I was a kid was when I was a kid, it wasn't normal for both parents to work outside the home. It wasn't normal for kids to go to daycare. You got home and mom was there and she welcomed you, and you always knew that somebody was going to be there for you. And there were latchkey kids was a term we used for the kids who didn't have a parent to go home to. Today that's the norm, and our kids are growing up with a much more individualistic mindset. They don't think about having trusting relationships, and then it becomes more difficult for them to enter into authentic relationships of love when they enter into dating and engagement.
I think this is a good time, Father, to kind of talk a little bit about Covenant Eyes and how that can help in this regard. Could you tell people a little bit about Covenant Eyes?
So Covenant Eyes accountability software is both a filtering software and an accountability software. So it's something I recommend to every family in order to protect their kids online. But basically how it works is it's a program that goes on all your mobile devices, all your tablets, all your home computers, and it will send a report every week to a parent or to another trusted adult that says every single website that you visited that day. And it's not simply something that you use because you're afraid your kids are looking at pornography. It's something that you use so that your kids know that the internet's not a private space, that somebody always knows that somebody's always watching what they're doing. It's a public place. They're less likely to get in trouble. I also recommend Covenant Eyes for engaged couples when they're dating, because many couples I know have gotten into trouble because of social media and because of the internet. They just spend too much time on the internet and too much time on social media. And so Covenant Eyes helps to bridge the gap between technology and relationships, even within a marriage, so that, the husband knows exactly how many hours his wife is on Pinterest, and she knows how many hours he's on ESPN. And we shouldn't have to hide the information from each other. And social media profiles should all get married when people get married. So when you get married, you marry your Facebook profile, and it says Bob and Sue Smith, because nobody's divorced ex-high school girlfriend writes to Bob and Sue Smith when she's feeling lonely. And I'm amazed at the number of couples that I've seen who have actually gotten divorced over a relationship that started because somebody's ex-boyfriend or girlfriend contacted them on social media. Cool. And I've seen that in couples that are in their 20s, and I've seen that in couples that are in their 60s. Wow. So it's not just a problem for young people.
That's some heavy stuff, Father. CovenantEyes.com is actually giving out a promo. If you're interested in doing this, you can get it for 30 days for free. You go to CovenantEyes.com. You can use the promo code FREETOLOVE, FREETOLOVE, all one word. And that'll give you a 30-day trial for you to test it out and see if you like it. It seems like a really good thing for families to have. So let's move on to the second discussion topic. And you guys covered some of this already, but I think the biggest question that stands out to me anyway is, looking for these indicators that the marriage might be in trouble, or the relationship, because we are talking about couples that are preparing for marriage as well. What sort of things should couples be looking out for, little red flags that something might be wrong, that they might be able to nip in the bud? And let's see, who can we start with? Let's go with Dr. Bottaro.
Sure. Yeah. So there are a number of different sort of areas that you can look at. I think sort of the main topic already that's been brought up is pornography, and this is something that I deal with a lot with couples who come to me for counseling or consultation during their engagement period. And sometimes it's a big question of, should we get married, or should I marry him, or should I marry her if there's there's this major trauma, or if there's an addiction. And, I wish I could give a blanket answer to that question, but I can't. It really is on an individual basis, but it is a major red flag. Whether there's sexual trauma, whether there's pornography use, and especially with pornography, the nature of it as an addiction is so severe in the way that it affects the brain that it's actually really naive to think about it solely as a spiritual issue. And in many cases, most cases, I would say it's beyond a spiritual issue, because the capacity of the will is so limited by the presence of a biochemical addiction that's happening in the brain. And so it's not just something that needs greater fervor and prayer or going to confession more, although those things are spiritually incredibly beneficial and they should definitely be happening at the same time. Because this is the nature of an addiction, it does require the help of an expert who is trained in really working through addictions. So if that's happening, if that's noticed or found out in the engagement process or in the dating process, that's definitely a red flag. Sexual trauma in the past for either a man or a woman can be extremely detrimental to a marriage. And so that's another red flag that needs to be worked through. It creates all kinds of problems with the ability to really give oneself to another. Because of that traumatic reaction, there's a severe defensiveness, which is contrary to the vocation of marriage. And so, again, these are not deal breakers, but they are flags. And so there are things that want to be brought to a professional to talk through and work through. On the less severe part of the spectrum, going back to my original comments on this culture of selfishness and the inability to really give of oneself, just see that having an inability to put oneself in another's shoes and really work through in communication where the other person is coming from is a real red flag. It's not just a simple emotional immaturity. And before marriage, that's an emotional indicator of a personality disposition that carries through into the sexual relationship and into the marital intimacy that occurs through communication that's vital to a healthy marriage. And so, of course, couples fight, and they're going to have different opinions, and they're going to have, all sorts of conflicts along the way. But having the ability to put oneself in the other's shoes and say, okay, you know what, I totally disagree with you, but let me try to understand it how you see it. And let me just spend some time in that space and get there. That's critical. And so if the person is unable to do that, then that's definitely a red flag that needs to be looked at. And so I could go on and on. I'll cut myself off right there just to give other people a chance to chime in.
All right, well, let's move on to Father Sikorsky. With your work with the Institute for the Psychological Sciences, what kind of trends have you seen, I guess, in society at large right now? And I know that you were part of an open letter to the bishops ahead of the synod as well, so maybe you could discuss that a bit.
Right. Well, I guess the letter that we sent was try and give an overview of what the real issues are in marriage, and that we can focus on certain things. I mean, there's been a lot of attention given to divorce and remarried and communion, and should homosexuals, what's their role in the church? But the bigger battlefield is, overall, what are we doing to help strengthen marriage, to help prepare people for marriage? And kind of picking up on what Dr. Bottaro said, I think one area is just examining that relationship. Are there signs of an unhealthy relationship? And obviously things like pornography would be certain signs of that, but more in a more general way, in sort of a context, is one person hurting the other person? Is one person, dominating the relationship? Would be the first thing. Every possible way that we hurt people is something that needs to be addressed. Secondly, do we know how? Is there an atmosphere where we can express to the other person what's hurting us, and we can have honest conversations? Because people are all different. Each person is a mystery in a certain way, and we lack a lot of times self-knowledge so that people can understand, what causes their hurt in their partner. And finally, we need to accept the fact that we can hurt other people, and we need to be humble and realize that. Sometimes it's hard for us. Maybe we feel the pain from a lack of love for other people, but we forget that even when we don't intend to do so, many times our actions are hurtful, and we've touched a sensitivity of the other person that really causes them a lot of stress. They may not be good at expressing that. So that whole context of helping people to realize, to have realistic expectations about marriage, and to understand how to communicate about difficulties and struggles, about hurts, and to be able to not expect more from marriage than it's a beautiful sacrament, it's a beautiful gift from God. But sometimes we can maybe have too idealistic visions of how it is lived out in practice, and so we realize that we're subject to original sin. Our partners are subject to original sin. But other than only two people in history were not subject to original sin, and they both lived with Saint Joseph. But just having a realistic expectation, it's going to require sacrifice, self-giving, and an ability to really accommodate and understand the other person and what their needs are and how we can better serve them.
Steve, you, with Paradisus Day, recently released what you've called the choice line, and that kind of focuses on helping couples build strong, lasting marriages. And if people want to find out more about it, they can go to your website, paradisusday.com. But I'm wondering, what was it in our culture that led Paradisus Day to create something like that?
Sure, and we're getting ready to release it, just so you know, so to be out this fall.
My apologies.
Yeah, no. It's called The Choice Line, 7 Steps to a Superabundant Marriage. And what it really is it's a follow-up to our That Manage You program. And from the outset of our That Manage You program, we had wives saying, we love what we see happening in our husbands, and we want something explicitly for our marriages. And so we had this incredible demand and request, and from the men as well, wanting to do something with their wives. And then we went through and we looked at it, and we said, if you look all the way back to the Garden of Eden, the first expression of joy contained in all of Scripture is when man sees his bride. And marriages are called to give us great joy. And in fact, the pathway to that, even though they're not easy, is pretty simple. It's not rocket science of what it takes. It is difficult, but it's not rocket science. And so we wanted to identify some of these things for couples. And we say that if we live these 7 steps of superabundant marriage, it A, divorce-proofs your marriage, and then B, it sets it on the road to superabundance. So if you go through and you look at those 7 steps, honor your wedding vows, use money for other people, give God some of your time, set your mind on the things above, find God in yourself, find God in other people, and make it easy to be good and hard to be bad, which is about mercy. Those 7 steps, if you look at it, people following those 7 steps, according to secular independent research, the probability of divorce was actually 0 in the survey. At the same time, when they ask them how happily are you married, 4 out of 5 people following those steps said they were very happily married, which is the highest possible answer they could give. The other 1 out of 5 were happily married, and 0, literally no one said they weren't happily married. And so even though it's not easy, the pathway can be identified for how can you have a superabundant marriage. And that's what God wants for us. He wants us to have superabundance, and he doesn't want us to struggle through 20, 30, 40, 50 years of a bad marriage and then say, "Whew, I'm done, I made it." He wants us to experience joy. And so our whole goal is to help couples see the very practical things that lead to problems and the easy or simple solutions to those things. And just real quickly, because I want to let you move on, but one thing that hasn't come up tonight thus far that's absolutely critical is the media. And with the media, I'm not talking about explicitly pornography here. I'm talking about the generic media. And I would say there are two major issues with the media. The first thing is all of those things that I said are the behaviors that lead to divorce, whether it's sexual infidelity, whether it's money problems, or so. All of those things are correlated with media use. The more you are tuned into the normal secular media, the more likely you are to do all of those things. So on the one hand, media is fairly toxic. And again, I'm not talking about pornography. I'm talking about your normal mainstream media. It's fairly toxic about changing your behavior. The second thing is, even if you're not watching toxic media, the average person today gives all of their free time to the media, which has crowded out personal relationships. Another one of the main indicators of marital health is how much time do I spend with my spouse in non-busy activity. And then when it's non-busy activity, we have to understand that both television and the internet have been proven to be isolating instances. So even if my wife is sitting here watching television together, we're actually locked in our own little world. And so the media is crowding out all the time we have for each other. I really think, and one of the number one things we tell all couples, if you truly want a superabundant marriage, you've got to get the media under control in your house. And I'm not talking about, again, the problem. I'm talking about the average media. If you don't get that under control, you're going to struggle.
Before I move on to Father Kilcally's thoughts on this, Steve, people are sending questions. And by the way, I haven't mentioned, there is a question feature with this GoToWebinar that if you have questions that you want to ask the panelists, I'm monitoring those. And so after we get through kind of the presentation portion of this webinar, we'll be going through hopefully all of the questions, but at least some of them, and I'll try to combine if there are some that are similar. But there is a question feature that you can do that. There are several people asking if those 7 steps to an abundant marriage, Steve, are written down somewhere that they can study them a little deeper.
Well, I tell you what, if you go to our website, www.paradisusday.org, then we give you information. The book will be published with this. It'll come out this fall. There's a new program that we're releasing to parishes starting this fall. And so you can sign up for that now. In a couple of months, it'll all be there. In our men's program, That Man Is You, those 7 steps are already there for men. And what we now do is to develop them in a special way for couples.
All right, spell Paradisus Day.
Oh, sorry. Okay, it's Paradisusdei, which is all one word, paradisusday.org, and that's Latin for the paradise of God. We say that God intends marriage and the family to be his paradise where he dwells in a unique way.
Beautiful thoughts. And if you are a viewer that wants to learn more about it, go to the website to learn more about the choice wine and also That Man Is You, rather. Now, Father Kilcally, Steve kind of touched on this already, but the idea of media being a warning sign, and I'm wondering, just to kind of jump off of that point, media use being a real warning sign for potential problems in a marriage, how Covenant Eyes can really help with that process.
Now I'd agree with Steve that it's media use in general, and not strictly pornography, and even not strictly internet. It's just media use in general. I kind of talk about the inability to be alone with God. We have this intolerance for silence, always having to be checking our mobile devices, checking our emails, whatever it is. One of the major complaints that I hear from wives is often that my husband won't stop checking his email when he comes home from work. So he never unplugs from work. And there are some basic features on every phone that he could set so that it doesn't download his email directly when he's home outside of work hours. And so I've worked with couples on some things like that. Having a basket in your house that you put all your mobile devices in. One of the things we talked about the last webinar was like setting aside specific media-free times for the whole family to be together. Because one of my concerns also is that kids aren't having that relational time with their parents as they're growing up, and so how do we expect them to be able to accomplish that with their wife when they get married? But Covenant Eyes also, like the whole purpose of the program is to provide the space, for having real relationships in one's life. And so it's just a way of also being accountable about the way we spend our time. The report would even include the hours that you're online. Both, for the husband to be accountable to his wife, for her to be accountable to him, but for their kids to be accountable for them as well. But I think Covenant Eyes works best when it's seen as part of an overall vision for making space for relationships within the family. It's just a tool we use to make space to have real relationships, face-to-face communication, and just spending time together. Because so many couples don't spend time together. We have a date night once a month, sponsored by the diocese, and there's all these couples that love it. But my question is always, why haven't you been going on a date until we told you that you should go on a date? So they're like really Catholic couples, and they'll go on a date if the priest says they should go on a date. They'll go on a date. But couples need to spend time together, and we get caught up in the busyness of our lives, and we really miss out on the best things in life.
Yeah, for sure. Dr. Batara, I want to ask you kind of a follow-up question. If you start seeing problems in your relationship, a good solution, I'm sure you would say, is to seek out counseling. But oftentimes when you're in a situation where one member of the couple sees an issue, the other one doesn't want to admit it, or kind of sees counseling as some sort of stigma. I mean, how can you, if there's somebody out there who is struggling in their marriage right now and wants to seek out counseling but has an unwilling spouse, what kind of advice would you give them to sort of lovingly push them into it, I guess you could say?
To lovingly push, that's probably a way of going about it they want to avoid. To even think about pushing at all. But, a couple...
You know what I mean.
Yeah, of course. Certainly to just bare one's heart to one's spouse can actually be one of the most difficult things. And, I'm only half joking about commenting on that wording, because a lot of times it's easier to have a more defensive kind of stance where it takes a form of nagging or nitpicking or criticism or putting the other person down. And when it comes across that way, then the other spouse is certainly not going to respond with positivity and vulnerability on their part. So to just kind of lay it all out there, and that's to really be Christ on the cross, to really put oneself up on the cross, to just say, here I am, this is me with arms outstretched, bearing all for you, I'm really hurting. And I feel lonely in this marriage. I feel struggling in this marriage. I feel like we need help. I don't want to blame you. I just am struggling. I feel lonely. I think we should get some help. Certainly, to seek out a good Catholic therapist who's supportive of marriage and understands the role of grace, especially. Most of the work that I do and that our therapists do at Catholic Psych Institute is to facilitate the grace of God in the sacrament of matrimony. And so I love doing work with married couples because it's, besides the work that I do with priests who have access to the grace of holy orders, all I'm doing is facilitating a supernatural power. So it's incredible the kind of miracles that I see in my office, because it doesn't come down to therapeutic technique. It comes down to facilitating this grace that's present in the sacrament of matrimony. So, if you can even get somebody to just even be open to the idea, you can certainly check us out at CatholicPsych.com. And we have a number of therapists who are trained to work in that way. Before we get to that point, though, I also wanted to say, we do marriage therapy. I also do marriage enhancement, which is to take couples who are doing fairly well and kind of bring them to the next level. And something that I took from my time, I spent almost 4 years as a Franciscan friar with the CFRs in the Bronx. I was in temporary vows. And there was a pattern of life, of prayer, based on the vow of celibacy to God alone. And that pattern is like this. Every day, 1 hour was set aside, a holy hour to spend with God alone. And the doors to the friary were locked, and phones weren't answered, and it was a sacred time. 1 whole day a week was spent totally in prayer. It was a prayer day. And same thing, doors were locked, phones were turned off. 1 weekend a month was spent as a hermitage weekend. You'd go off to some place and do a retreat for a couple of days. And then 1 or 2 weeks a year were spent in solitude and prayer with God. Now, that had to do with the fact that a celibate makes their vow to God and God alone, and you need time to nurture and develop that relationship. And of course, the life itself is holy, and you're praying all the time, you're doing liturgy of the hours, and you're ministering and all that stuff. But both fathers, I'm sure, would agree that if you don't set a time aside to be totally alone with the one who you vowed your life to, then that relationship slips away, and it just becomes a lot of busy work. So I actually work with couples to do the same thing. And we're talking about the media as this huge distraction. It's 100% true. And if you just look at how much time you spend on the media, and instead take that measured amount of time, and maybe you can't do an hour every day. Maybe it's a half hour a day. Maybe you can't do a full day a week, but maybe it's a half day a week. And then maybe you shoot for a weekend every month, or maybe just, setting up any kind of schedule like that where it's regular and it's ordered and it's in proportion to the amount of time that has gone by since the last time you did it. Great fruit comes from that. And in that time, a couple has to face their conflicts and difficulties. So usually when one spouse wants the other to go to therapy, the other one is ignoring it. The other one is usually ignoring the problems and distracting with work, with the media, with shopping, with the kids, with whatever. And when you set that time aside, this is not for couples who are already doing well. This is for any couple, because then you set that part of time aside and then you realize, wow, we have nothing to talk about. Or, wow, I'm just all of a sudden really angry with you. We're supposed to be on date night right now and I just want to fight with you. Or, whatever happens, that conflict. And it gives a chance for both parts of the person, both the soul, the spirit, which is the invisible, and the body, which is the visible, to come together. And I mean that literally. So the conjugal life of the marriage, both the visible and the invisible part of the person, has a chance to come together. So maybe you realize, wow, we don't have a sex life, and it's really awkward and uncomfortable. Or we have no idea how to talk to each other, and this is what we need to work through. But that only happens when you create the space to really see what is going on in the relationship. And so I would say that's step number 1, is to try to create that space. Step number 2, just to put yourself out there and be vulnerable. And if you feel like there's a real problem, just to say it. I'm struggling, I feel lonely, we need some help. Will you please come with me to try to get some help?
There are people asking about your site again, and that's CatholicPsych.com. But you also, Dr. Bottaro, have a site called WellCatholic. You were discussing the importance of having a Catholic counselor, somebody that's looking at it from the Catholic perspective. And that's really what WellCatholic is set up to do, help people connect with Catholic counselors.
Yeah, actually, it's more than just Catholic counselors. WellCatholic is really for all healthcare, so it's not just mental health. And so on WellCatholic, we have a directory of every kind of healthcare physician that exists, from nutritionists to OBGYNs to pediatricians to general practitioners. And then we also have every type of mental health counselor that's out there as well. So it's really a catch-all for all Catholic healthcare, and it was really kind of born of the necessity. I found when I started my practice that people were looking for specifically Catholic mental health, and then it just seemed like a natural progression to say, why would we stop there? With the the healthcare mandates that are coming through, with the insurance issues, insurance companies paying for abortion, doctors are getting caught up in all this stuff. We really need to start to make a name for Catholic healthcare and kind of reinvent what the old hospital system used to look like when you had Catholic hospital systems, which have mostly closed out now. Now we can reinvent that on the private sector level, but you need a way to find those who are out there. So that's what WellCatholic is for. It's just a way to find doctors who practice according to Catholic principles, and that's all kinds of healthcare.
And if viewers are looking into that, it's wellcatholic.com, and you can sign up there. Well, let's move on to our final discussion topic before we get into the question and answers, and we're getting a lot of questions coming in. And Steve, I'll start with you for this one. What are some practical ways that parish leaders, whether that be priests, people in marriage ministry, people working with engaged couples, how can a parish leader or a Catholic leader help couples strengthen their relationships?
Sure. And and one thing I love is we're starting to see a change, which is nice, that, historically the church has done marriage preparation, and then we're kind of done with you. And we're starting to see a change in that now, that it's okay, marriage preparation, yes, we have to know how to enter the sacrament. Then we really need to help you have a wonderful life together. And there's lots of things going out there, obviously, for ourselves. The That Man Is You program and the Choice Wine program are two programs that are intended to precisely help couples experience them. And I think that I would really encourage all pastors, all parish leaders, to reach out there and understand that truly the backbone, of the church are families. And we need to work to strengthen families. And there's so many good programs. Obviously, the panelists have wonderful things out there. There's many things out there today that are wonderful. But in fact, if you do surveys, people who are sitting in the pew are primarily married couples, and especially married couples with kids or empty nesters. And we need to go through and we need to make sure we're strengthening those and keeping them in the church. And I really encourage all the pastors, all the priests to go out there, find the programs that have proven to work, and bring them in and make a place for them in the doctor things that the parish has going on.
Yeah. Father Sikorsky, could you just comment on, what kind of practical advice do you give couples when you're counseling them?
Well, I think a few of the things, we've heard several things already tonight that I think are very helpful, but two of the pillars, I think, are first self-knowledge and second virtue, okay? I think people's knowledge of themselves, self-awareness is really at a low level these days, and really helping people in a serene and humble way to understand what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, who they are, who their spouse is, and what their strengths and weaknesses are. I think that's very important. And then virtue. I think we, stressing the things that make marriages stronger rather than just trying to treat bad things. And, I think we conquer a lot more. We conquer evil by doing good, right? St. Paul says. So some of the things we know that are very helpful for happy marriages, we've talked a little bit about spending quantity and quality time, right? Not, get rid of the noise from the media. Also, teaching them and helping them to know how to express affection for each other. There's a great book called The 5 Languages of Love. It's amazing how many misunderstandings can arise in that area where people, we experience love in a particular way. In this book, so there's 5 basic ways that one experiences love. And they can be different for each person. And so while I might feel loved by, a hug, maybe my spouse, she really feels love. I don't have a spouse, but I did. She feels that from...
The church, Father, the church. What does the church want?
Could be words of affirmation, right? Well, some people like words of affirmation more than others. And so it's kind of learning how your spouse experiences and really feels love. Because most people, they want their marriage to work, right? Most everybody, right? They want to be happy. They don't want to hurt their spouse, but there's these disconnects, these blind spots that we need to work on. Sharing spiritual values and sharing, that's very important. We need to help them understand each other spiritually and to be on the same page. We've talked a little bit before communication, how to talk about conflicts and hurts in a positive way. One rule of thumb that can be helpful is, so for every negative thing that you need to bring up, make sure you've got five positives for every negative, right? So you're going to, and sometimes in business they talk about a sandwich approach. Well, reassure your spouse, look, I love you, I think you're doing a great job in this, that. The other thing, you may not realize it, but there's something here where I'm really struggling with, I'm hurting, and you may not realize it, but so learning how to communicate and talk about those things in a very constructive way. A couple other things that I've found helpful, forgiveness. Forgiving your spouse and also asking for forgiveness. In marriage prep, one of the things we tell the couples is, you haven't heard the words, please forgive me, yet you may want to run, okay? Now, you have to have that relationship that can be open, and there's enough humility there to recognize when we've offended the other. And forgiveness helps solve a lot of problems. And then the last thing I said would be gratitude. Cultivating gratitude in your relationship and really in your spiritual life, in your prayer. Thanking God for your spouse, thanking God for your children, thanking God for the good, helps us to really put it in perspective, and thanking them for their virtues and so forth, really helps us to be better prepared, to deal with their weaknesses and limitations and the times that they may hurt us. Because we're building these people up inside. So living a gratitude based on a real Christian charity can be very helpful to strengthen a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Before I let you go, Father, we started off this sort of discussion topic by, trying to look for practical ways that parish leaders or priests or what have you could help couples and in strengthening their marriages. And I mean, when you think about it, there might be some people who are watching right now that are really interested in, being like Dr. Bottaro, a shining example of a graduate from the Institute for the Psychological Sciences. So I was wondering if you could just take a minute to promote IPS here and what you do in trying to foster Catholic psychology.
Well, thank you, Anna. Yeah, I think Dr. Bottaro is our best advertisement. But basically, we're a graduate school, Catholic graduate school. We have master's and doctoral degrees, and the mission of the school is really simple. It's to harmonize the modern science of psychology with the Christian view of the person, the Christian view of the family, and Christian morals. And as the church teaches and sees those things. So one of the things that obviously you can do at IPS is you can study the human person as the church sees them. You can study marriage as the church teaches. You have true academic freedom. You can raise issues that might get you kicked out of some other schools, unfortunately, these days. But so that's our focus. We're located in the Washington, D.C. area. We have a master's and doctoral program here on site. And last October, we began an online master's program. It's a 36-credit program that lasts 2 years, and you'll learn a lot about the things that we're talking about this evening, and really founded on a real understanding of the person as the church sees it, and as we've learned from Aquinas and Augustine all the way up through Pope John Paul, Pope Benedict, and now Pope Francis. So it's grounded in that, and our proud finished product is Dr. Bottaro here, who's one of those, and doing great work. And we really truly are proud of the work that he's doing.
I actually happen to know 2 other graduates of IPS who are excellent counselors as well, who are here in the Cincinnati area at Rua Woods, which is a Theology of the Body Institute, which is just some really awesome things going on in the field of Catholic psychology, which really seems to be growing by leaps and bounds. So it is really exciting. And if you're interested in learning more about IPS, you can go to Pornography.com is the easiest site to remember, to go check it out and perhaps maybe take a few classes as well. Father Kilkelly, I want to end this discussion with you. We're going back to this idea of, practical advice for priests and parish leaders in helping couples. And I'm wondering, in your counseling work with couples, and I know you do a lot of it, what kind of tips do you give to them, particularly if they're struggling with like a porn addiction?
With the basic tip that I would give, most easy soundbite, is be stubborn about having joy in your life, and be willing to do whatever it takes to have joy in your life. And so when somebody is struggling with a pornography addiction, they need to be stubborn about getting sobriety. That means they're willing to do whatever it takes. They're going to meet with their spiritual director, go to a 12-step group, go to counseling, whatever it takes in order to get that out of their life, because it's an obstacle to joy in their own personal life and in their marriage. And generally speaking, married couples need to be stubborn about having joy in their lives, which means they're going to do whatever it takes. If they have to go to counseling, they go to counseling. Every family needs to be monitoring their internet connection, period. So if you're not currently monitoring your internet connection, go to covenantize.com, put in the code, and try it free for 30 days, right? It's a minimum to safeguard joy in your family. And, in my own priesthood, this has been my experience, is like, I've been a priest who was lonely in his priesthood. And I've been a priest who struggled with depression when I was in graduate school. And I had a choice to make. I can either stuff all of this and just kind of be miserable and gut it out, and at the end of my life say, okay, like, I suffered and now I'm going to get a big reward. Or I could go to therapy. And I had to go to my bishop and ask to go to therapy. I went to a really good Catholic psychologist that helped me to figure out what it was that was an obstacle to joy. And it transformed my priesthood. It transformed my own life. And I would share that with all couples who, if they're lonely in their marriage, if there's any kind of red flags, if they just feel like something's a little bit off, do whatever it takes in order to remove those obstacles to joy. Be stubborn about your conversion to our Lord. The more in love with our Lord we are, the more we're able to love each other with the love of Christ for his church. And that has to be the most important thing in our lives.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what's the point?
Absolutely. We're going to move into the question and answer session here, and just to start things off, Becky's asking if this is recorded and if they can share it. Yes, we are recording it, and it will be sent out to anyone who is signed up and registered for this webinar. And then please share at large, because we are looking to, get the word out and really try to help strengthen marriages. It's the whole purpose of this. The whole reason why all of these men have ministries right now is to help, as the Institute for Psychological Sciences says, heal our culture. So please, 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 if you found this at all helpful and are thinking of anybody who might find this at all helpful, please definitely share it. You'll be getting a link to this webinar's recording a little bit later. Jordan, our esteemed organizer, will be making sure that happens. So I want to start off with this question that we received before the webinar, actually, gentlemen, and comes from a woman who is divorced. Her marriage was annulled. She's got 3 adult children, and she's wondering how she can sort of, uphold or show them what a faithful marriage looks like when her own marriage was so broken. Gosh, I don't know which of you to start with. I guess Steve, maybe you could address it first.
Sure, and I think first of all, it's a wonderful question, and it's spot on in many ways. That so many of the youth in our culture have experienced brokenness in their family of origin, and for many of them, it tries to close the heart. And I'd say there's a couple of things in the book that we have coming out in Choice Wine. Actually, and I come from a broken home myself. My mother and father got divorced after we were out of the home, but nonetheless, all of us experienced a very rocky marriage while we were in it. And the beautiful thing is when I married my wife, Shelley, her parents had what everybody would want in a marriage. And as we went through and as we were writing the book, all of a sudden I started tying these 7 steps to Riley and Rosemary. And quite interesting, as I had secular people going through editing the book, they were crying. And they were saying, I want what Riley and Rosemary have. And they're saying, I'm going to do what you said in this book. And to put in front of people beautiful images, and if it's not ours, that for some reason we had a broken home, it doesn't mean they're not out there. And to find those images, because I think what we have to say is that since God created the human heart, He created it with the natural desire for love. We all have a thirst for that love that nothing else can replace. And so that's a natural desire, and the wounds are what keep us from seeking that. And I think if we can put that in front of people, then they go towards it, and then we give them practical help so I how you live it. That's what we tried to do when our program, The Choice Wine, comes out. And it's amazing how people responded to Riley and Rosemary, a couple who lived it faithfully all the way to the end. And so I would put in front of people beautiful images of that marriage, and then the practical steps how you can have what they have. It does wonders for people.
And Father Sikorsky, do you think that in this kind of instance that it at least goes so far to discuss at least the brokenness that she experienced in her marriage with her children, to be open about it?
I think so. I think that in a loving and tactful way, without trying to put the blame on the other spouse and so forth. Talk about the disappointments and the struggle and the frustration and how you want it better for them, and I think that long term, I think humility from parents and it can do a lot of good, and the kids, they're intelligent. They'll learn as they go along. I think they can end up having more esteem for someone who does something like that, who's willing to talk about it. I think that can do a lot of good in the long run and help them to better understand what happened. And I think that's a good way to proceed.
Dr. Bottaro, I want to move on to another question here. Somebody that is saying that there's the possibility of divorce in her marriage after 30 years of marriage, this says, and she doesn't want to get divorced, but it looks like her husband does. What advice would you give? I mean, not knowing her full situation, I mean, what kind of preliminary things would you advise?
Yeah, without knowing the details, there's a lot of ways to answer the question, and there certainly are, many situations just like that, and those are the kinds of calls that I get, multiple times a week. So, I would say, obviously, to make this a spiritual reality, praying and fasting and seeing this as a real spiritual trial, to really kind of trust in God's providence. That's kind of like the spiritual side of it, to have peace and to not let anxiety overcome one's heart. And so that's something that becomes a psychological issue very quickly that I deal with. If we really have the trust in God and abandonment to divine providence, that cures a lot of psychological disorder. So just in the anxiety of asking the question, there's certainly that piece of it, to trust in God directing this. But again, going back to what I said earlier, to be really vulnerable, to not, a lot of times there's just so many layers of defensiveness built up, especially over 30 years, and to really be able to say, I've participated in this difficulty, and to take ownership of that, and to seek to understand how each person has contributed to the difficulties. So if the other person wants a divorce, that's obviously a serious place. To also give some consolation here and some hope that, a lot of times when emotions are running so high, or somebody will say, I want a divorce, depending on, again, the circumstances, if it's accompanied with a lot of emotion, that's really the opposite side of love in terms of emotional love. and a feeling of affection and love. So it's the other side of the coin. A lot of times it's kind of difficult water to tread into with the marriage therapy when one spouse is totally apathetic and just totally checked out, and not just distracted, not just defensive, but really they show up happy-go-lucky, ready to take on a session. Say, sure, let's talk about our problems. I'm not sticking around because I don't really care anymore. I've totally moved on, but I have no problem talking about it. That lack of defensiveness is actually really disheartening. But when there's anger, when there's bitterness, when there's resentment, when there's hurt feelings, those are actually really good signs. And I look at those things and I say, okay, this is actually hopeful, because what we have there is a total breakdown in ability to communicate feelings from one to the other. And when there's this inability to communicate feelings, then there's this isolation that occurs, and a person gets to the point where they feel like, I'd be better off divorced than actually sticking this out. John Paul II wrote about this in his book Love and Responsibility, and there's a section in that book, and I use it almost every week. I know the page number. It's page 200 in Love and Responsibility. And he talks about, he has a section called On Tenderness. And he talks about the ability to, like I mentioned earlier, to step into the world view of the other person, to be in the other person's shoes, to understand how they think and feel, and then to communicate to that person that you are feeling it with them. So it's not just empathy. Empathy is to understand. But tenderness is to understand and communicate that you understand. And what John Paul II says is, when you hear this, it creates a sense of unity, that somebody else is sharing it all with me. Well, the opposite of that is when you don't step into the world of the other person. And that creates the opposite of unity, which is disunity or isolation. And so even for this woman to say, I want to understand how disheartened you feel. What it must be like after 30 years of trying to stick out a marriage, and you're now considering just giving up on it and moving on with your life. And not in a blaming way, not in a critical way, but in a compassionate way. How sad that must be for you. And to enter into the shoes of the other person, to understand where they're coming from, that can actually have the opposite of effect of it won't nurture that sense of separation. It'll actually do the opposite. It'll create at least the beginning of a bridge of unity. And so hopefully the conversation there can get started by trying to put oneself in the other person's shoes and then say, you know what, let's find somebody who will help us do this better. And that's what that facilitation of that marital grace looks like, practically speaking, with therapeutic technique, is learning how to put one's own mind and heart in the other person's world, to kind of put your own to the side for the moment, to listen to the other, to be able to empathize, put it into words that you understand what the other person is going through. It's a model of marital therapy, but it's actually already laid down as a foundation by John Paul II and by countless others before that, in terms of really being one with the other. And so there are a lot of possibilities there.
Father Kilcully, there are a couple of questions about infidelity that have come up, and from is online texting and Facebooking with someone, can that be considered infidelity? And you kind of touched on that already, that there have been marriages broken up because of that. But going all the way to sexual infidelity, where a child was conceived outside of a marriage relationship with another person. I mean, what kind of advice do you give to couples that struggle with that, whether it be online infidelity all the way to sexual infidelity? I know that's a wide range. Father, are you there? There you are. Maybe.
I muted myself. Okay.
There you are.
But like I was saying, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So it is a wide range. I think when there is that kind of online infidelity, so somebody I think wrote, it's like flirting or just one thing? Is that a problem? anything that you do, anybody you communicate with, that you're trying to hide that from your spouse, there's something wrong with your intimacy. Right? Intimacy means this person is allowed to know every single thing about my life. Right? Like, that's the tenderness that Dr. Pataro was talking about. You know, the ability to enter into somebody else's world. If we have part of our world that we're keeping separate, then there's something lacking in our intimacy. You know, and that applies to our relationship with God. It applies to our relationships with each other. And so every couple needs to safeguard against those obstacles to intimacy. And so I wouldn't accuse somebody of having an affair who sent, you know, a couple of text messages to another person, but that might be a warning sign in a place where they want to reel themselves in and make sure they're having a discussion with their spouse about that communication. You know, never to do anything unwise and to have good boundaries around things. Sort of, is it okay for a husband to go to dinner with a female colleague? It's probably not wise. Lunch would be different than dinner. I know a guy, he'll never ride in a car alone with another woman besides his wife. That's just where his boundary is. When there's been a physical, like, flesh line crossed in infidelity, like, there has to be a whole reparative process that takes place. And, like, as a priest, when people come to me with it, you know, the first thing I start to do is try to get them to go to therapy, you know, to work through that, try to find the root causes of that, like what is off in their life. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes people to really hit bottom before they're willing to get help. But I have seen couples reconcile I've seen a couple come back from the brink of divorce and reconcile because they found their way to the right therapist who knew how to address the issues, had the right amount of empathy for both the wife and the ability to help the husband to kind of work on his core issues, and they're an intact family right now. And so we're indebted to therapists who work with couples in crisis situations. And I would, again, encourage them to be stubborn about, like, having that joy in their life and in their marriage. You know, in the case of a child being conceived out of an affair, like, that becomes a whole other issue, a whole other area of betrayal, I would say, where there needs to be a forgiveness, but then also the realization that this child just came into the world and this child is a child of God. And now the family is a little more complicated than it was before. But remember that our Lord entered into a really complicated family. He didn't just enter into the Holy Family of Nazareth. He entered into the whole, like, history of the people of Israel that had all kinds of dysfunctional families. In Matthew's gospel, we have that whole genealogy full of dysfunctional family members. And then at the end it says, then was born Jesus. And our Lord can always enter into our families, no matter how broken they are. And that's where our hope lies. And that's where conversion starts.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many questions left, and we're already over the time that we had kind of promised to try to hit here. Maybe we can kind of get the rest of the questions sort of summed up, and maybe they can be answered at a later time. I think I'm just going to cut it here for now. This has been a really enlightening discussion with Steve Bowman from Paradise Day, Father Charles Sikorsky from the Institute for the Psychological Sciences, Dr. Greg Pataro of WellCatholic and Catholic Psych Institute, and Father Sean Kilcully with Covenant Eyes. And wow, I mean, some really, really great stuff here, gentlemen, and thank you so much for your insights. And remember, if you're viewing this, you will get a link to this recording that we hope that you will share far and wide. And just to recap the various ministries here before I let everybody go, Father Kilcully was with Covenant Eyes. That's covenanteyes.com. And remember, there is a code that you can use to get a free 30-day trial. That would be free to love, all one word, free to love. The Institute for the Psychological Sciences, if you're interested in looking into a master's degree in psychology, go to healourculture.com. Paradisus Dei, which seeks to help build strong, lasting marriages and offers parish programs with that. It's paradisuSDEI.org, PARADISUSDEI.org, and of course, WellCatholic is WellCatholic.com. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for this. And Father Kilcally, since I already made Father Sikorsky pray at the beginning, would you mind closing us with a prayer and your blessing?
Absolutely. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together to reflect on the great sacrament of holy matrimony. We pray for all those attending this webinar, for all of their family members, for all struggling families, for all those who are lonely in their marriages, that they may be open to your grace, your love, and your mercy, and that through their mercy, your mercy, they may grow in joy and come to truly reflect your love for the church. And through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, Saint Joseph, and all the saints, may Almighty God bless you all, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you again, Steve, Father Sikorsky, Dr. Bottaro, and Father Kilcally for joining us tonight. My name again is Anna Mitchell. I've been moderating, and I hope you'll tune in tomorrow for the Sunrise Morning Show. I'm actually sitting in the hosting chair this week because our normal host, Matt Swaim, is on vacation this week. So yeah, it's a real party over at the Sunrise Morning Show. So if you can tune in at 6 a.m. Eastern, I'd love to chat with you over the radio. You can find me online at sunrisemorningshow.com. That's S-O-N, like the Son of God, sunrisemorningshow.com. So again, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and please share this far and wide because we really do want to heal our culture. Thank you, and God bless. Good night.
Thanks, Anna.